Dr. Ralph Noble, Dean, College of Ag, South Carolina State University, introducing Dr. Silva from Clemson University.
I've been on the program with her a couple of times, but I've attended many more of her field days and workshops. She shows her expertise, her knowledge. There's a number of experiment stations in the state. So she looks at different forages throughout the state in terms of what they do, what conditions make them flourish, what are mistakes we can make sometimes trying to grow them. She has very practical information and very good application of material. So I normally enjoy listening to her speak. I think for sure you'll learn something today.
Sure. So thank you so much, Dr. Nova, for this introduction. And I want to start everything saying really thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with this group. One thing that I always mention to a new group is that you might be trying to figure out where my accent is from. I'm from Brazil. I did both my undergraduate degree and master's degree in Brazil at the University of São Paulo. And then I came to University of Florida for my PhD degree. After I graduated from there, I went to work at Auburn University. And while I was in Auburn, I worked in extension. So I was able to get some experience there, working both for the extension system in Alabama and also get involved with some of the regional extension groups and working actually a little bit in Georgia as well with Jennifer Tucker. She's in Chieftain and she has an extension position as well. So I joined Clemson 2.5 years ago. I don't know how long I can keep saying this, but I'm fairly early, like a new person here. So I'll be talking about warm season annual forages today. And this is actually one of the projects that I've been doing here. And I'll be running the second year of this study here. But I really wanted to start talking a little more general aspect. So I like to usually mention some of the more general overview of systems, and I'll be focusing more on the grazing systems. So this is just a general overview of the Southeast. We usually use perennial grasses as the basis of our forage systems. And Bahia grass, Bermuda grass, and tall fescue are really the major perennial grasses that we use. But we definitely have their growth season spread around some months of the year. So there are some months that we do need to prepare to have some additional forages conserved, or some other options which are can be annual forages that we could be using for grazing. So the animals could be going there and grazing. So this is definitely where the annual forages come on board, including the summer and the cool season forages. And they do provide good forage mass, good yield, but also they are usually higher quality forages, so there's also the nutritional benefits of having them included on the systems. So this is basically what I was talking about. So these curves, they're just sort of like showing general distribution of growth of Bermuda grass and Bahia grass throughout the months of the year. And the same thing we can see here for the warm season annuals as well. So they usually we will be planting warm season annuals in April through early May or mid-May for the general region that we're in. And we would be able to start grazing them depending on the rainfall or like the temperatures that we're getting on that year. We're usually looking at start grazing 45, 60 days. And then really being able to graze those systems, if well established and managed, we can continue to graze those areas throughout September. So it really helps us to fill a gap of forages that we have in some systems. So I don't know if anybody here has tall fescue on their pastures. Depending where you are throughout the state, you might. They're in Georgia, but definitely something that it could be beneficial both for the complementing the tall fescue system period when tall fescue will be dormant, or even just being a boost of quality for systems where you're using Bermuda grass or Bahia grass as the major grass. Usually I do just visual because let's for a minute, let's just imagine that this line, this black line across the graphic represents the needs that you have for your herd for the entire year. None of these species by itself would fulfill the needs for yield that you have throughout the whole year. So even when you're having over the line growth, you would be able to be harvesting that for hay or for baleage, or letting stockpile the perennial grasses, or even the annual grasses. You can also do some storage of that excessive yield that you get at some points. So there are several ways that you can be working around this, and I'll be discussing a little more in details in a minute. But definitely budgeting your forage needs, both from the yield and the nutritional sides are very important for you. And this is some of the points that we're going to talk about. So, I don't know how many of you are already familiar with warm season forages, but they are really fast growing. So if you ever planted or been around pure millet, sorghum, they are really quick to grow and accumulate forage mass, and they're high quality forages, which is really good for you if you have animals that have higher nutritional requirements during that period, because it's going to support animal performance. So when I'm talking about animal performance, it can be either actual growth, pounds of meat that the steers will be putting on, or even when we are working with replacement heifers, for example, you want to be able to develop those animals to gain weight and be ready for breeding. So this is definitely something that could help you really with the nutrition needs as well. And then planting window really depends where you are in the state. Some parts in the north where we're going to be a little colder for longer in the year, sometimes you can push to plant through June, but generally most areas in the southeast, we're going to be looking at planting from April through May. And definitely you should try to match that planting time with when you expect to have some rainfall coming through over the next weeks, because unless you have an irrigation system on the area, you definitely will be depending on the rainfall. So this is definitely something that you should consider as well when you are planting. And we can plant either in monoculture, which is just like planting one species by itself. So for example, if you're planting pure millet, just pure millet, that's a monoculture. Or you could be mixing species. You could be mixing different grasses together, or you could be mixing grasses with legumes. We are going to discuss a little bit more, but there are benefits of mixing species, because you can either extend a little further the growth, so the grazing season as well, or even working on the quality that you're getting for that forages. Something that's really important, no matter which species, which system you have, is definitely looking at the soil pH and the soil fertility that you have beforehand, especially if you're going to establish something new, because you want to make sure that that pH is correctly for the plants that you're using. And for example, most of the forages, including the perennial grasses that we generally use, like Bahia grass, Bermuda grass, they need to be around 5.5 as the soil pH, because that's the soil pH that most of the nutrients will be available for them to consume, for them to be able to grow and really produce well during that season. And that's particularly important when you are establishing something new, because then you are getting a plant that's just germinating and starting to grow. So it's really important that that plant has access to the nutrients and is able to grow well, to establish well. And then if you get a good establishment and you manage that system well, you're going to get the proper length of the grazing and really be getting a good amount of forages, and it's going to be more economical as well for you introducing those species. So Some of the benefits, and we're going to talk a little more about the species in a second, but some of the benefits that we can have when we're using annual forages is really that they can be working in different ways. So for us, for example, that we're going to be looking at livestock, we're looking at the forage supply, right? That the animals will be eating that forages. But they will be able to recycle some of that nutrient that's in the soil and put back some of the nutrient for the next crop that you're going to have on that area. They will be covering the area that could have been a fallow for too long and would be open to more weeds. So when you have something covering the area as the warm season annuals, you're working on reducing weeds encroachment, the amount of weeds that you have there. And also you're going to be working on the soil health aspect and also inputting organic matter and some other things. So definitely there are benefits beyond just as a forage supply for the whole system. And when I talk about system, I'm talking about the plants, the soil, and the animals. So definitely there are several benefits there. So we do have several options that we can use as annual forages during the warm season. Some of them are here. So we have millet, we have Sunn hemp. I'm going to talk a little more about in a second if you're not familiar with. We have Cowpea, forage soybean, a lot of things. Because of this diversity of species that we have, it's important for us to understand a little more about each one of them. Just to have a general idea where they could fit. So one of the most common species is sorghum. A lot of people probably tried out sometime before. I do have some information here about seeding rates. These are for monocultures. We're going to talk in a minute about mixtures. For mixtures, you need to reduce the seeding rate that you're going to be using because you're combining different species. So we're going to talk about that in a second. But definitely, if you're able to fertilize the grasses properly, you can get a really high production, high yielding for that period. And generally, the warm season annuals, they're going to have at least 13% of crude protein if you're putting the proper fertilization there. And some of them can have close to 20% or even more than that, depending on how you're managing your system. We can have some issues with sugarcane aphids. So there are some varieties that are tolerant to it, and you can just check when you're buying the seeds with your salesperson which ones they have available. Definitely something that's worth to check because the price is not that different from the varieties that are more tolerant to the ones that are not, and it does make a difference when you have sugarcane aphids around. I had some plots in Alabama that I was working with sorghum there, and sometimes we had to spray to control the sugarcane aphids because it was really impacting the yield that we had in July, like late July, early August. So definitely something important to check. Most of those forages, we are going to need to make sure that we're going to start grazing when it's about 24, 25 inches tall, or at the most 30, 32. And then definitely we need to make sure that we understand what the stubble height. So stubble height is what is going to be left there. When we remove the animals, when you're using rotational grazing and you remove the animals to the next rotation, what's left there, it's the stubble height that we should be looking at. My recommendation is not go below 16 inches as the stubble height. And I'll show in a second a picture of the growing point of a millet plant, but that's the reason. So the growing point is on the top of the plant. So even on this picture here, we're seeing where the leaves are coming from. If you go too low on sorghum, millet, some species that have this stalk, like corn has, if you go too low and animals overgraze too much, you're gonna end up removing that growing point where the leaves are coming from, are growing from. And then if you do this, especially like if you do this on the first grazing event, then that plant may not be able to recover, and that would shorten your grazing season. So definitely something that's important to make sure that you are managing correctly. So another option that we have is Sudangrass, similar seeding rate than sorghum. Also, we have some sugarcane tolerant varieties, and it has some good drought tolerance. So we can definitely choose those varieties that are more tolerant. And it is a good option, and more people are using sorghum Sudangrass because we can have a good production and is really good option for grazing as well. One of the most common species that people have been using more and more is definitely pure millet. It has a little more tolerance to drought than the other two species that I just talked about. I don't know if drought is maybe an issue where you are at, but it's definitely an issue for us here in South Carolina. I've seen side by side sorghums and pure millet plots, and pure millets can really do better under the long drought conditions that we usually have. Some years in June until like early July. So definitely something that's worth to consider depending where you are, what type of soil you have, and whether you're able to irrigate or not. It does really well in mixtures, and one study that I have here, I've been using pure millet with other species in mixture, and I'll be showing some more details on this. Something that is really another good option that grows really quick is crabgrass. If you are not using crabgrass as a forage, you might have crabgrass on your garden or even on your pastures. And you probably noticed that crabgrass grows really fast because it's one of the things that germinates the earliest and then grows like really, really fast. And you can have ready to graze in like 30, 40 days, some years. It does well in well-drained soils, and it's going to be something that you're going to be managing with a 4 inches stubble height, and you're going to start grazing earlier than the other species that I talked that they grow taller. So generally, we're going to be looking at start grazing crabgrass when it's about 10, 12 inches tall. And it does have a really good quality. So usually we're going to have about 15% of crude protein. And this is really good for most of the livestock species that we would have grazing during that time. So definitely a good option. And it works really well in mixtures because especially when we have pre-millet or something that's going to be growing taller, crabgrass will be growing on the under canopy and will spread and really be able to cover the soil on the area, and the animals like and graze really well. So changing gears a little bit, we're going to talk a little bit about legumes. If you have never seen cowpea, on this picture here, cowpea is the species that's growing under the pure millet plants, and they work really well with other species. So I would not recommend you to plant cowpea by itself for grazing, but if you want to do, you're gonna need to be really careful with management. I've seen people graze too hard on the first grazing time, and then if the animals eat too low, these plants, they are not able to recover anymore. And then we end up having cowpea only on the first grazing cycle in the mixture. It's going to be a larger seed, so that's the reason that you probably notice the difference on the seeding rate. We generally use 25 to 30 pounds per acre when we're planting cowpea by itself, and then we're gonna use less when we're mixing. But they contribute to the quality of the mixtures, so it's definitely a good option that you can have on the mixture. The other plant that I'm going to talk about is a legume as well. If you have never seen sun hemp, it can grow in like 45 to 60 days. Usually it can grow about 5 feet tall. And if you let it grow, it end up having the flowers like on the picture to the left. So definitely management, especially for species that can grow this high, like really a lot of mass this fast, it's gonna be important because otherwise the animals still eat the plants when it's taller. Because I've seen that, like they go around and then they sort of like pull the top of the plant down and eat the leaves to the lower part. But if you want to try to keep the plants about the 30 inches tall for starting the grazing, just to be able to have a longer period grazing these plants. And in terms of seeding rate, it's going to be similar to what we would be using for millet or sorghum. It does produce a lot of biomass, and it's really good protein source. I've seen some mixtures that I had sun hemp with millet from last year that I was getting like 23% crude protein in July. If you think about what other forages you would have in July, it's really difficult to get over 20% in the perennial grasses. Usually we're going to have 13%, 15% at the most for the perennial grasses. So it's definitely something that would be adding quality to forage quality to your systems for animals that would be growing or you would be using for reproduction or for milk. So I mentioned that I was going to talk a little bit about forage mixtures, and this is something that a lot of my work, both for cool season and annual and warm season annuals, I use mixtures because when you combine different species, you are able to complement the growth season. So sometimes you're able to extend the period that you're going to have something growing on the pastures and able to extend that grazing and also work on the forage quality. And when we use legumes in mixture with other things, we can also have the benefit of those legumes fixing nitrogen. So this is just a general representation. So we have on the left a legume plant. This is actually like a representation of a clover plant. But when we have legumes with grasses, the legumes, they are able to fix nitrogen. So when we're talking about nitrogen fixation, if you ever bought clover seeds, you probably noticed that most of the seeds will have a coating around the seeds, and that's the inoculant. When you are buying warm season legumes, most of them will not come inoculated. You do need to buy the inoculant. The reason that we need to inoculate legume plants before we plant is because we're trying to make sure that those seeds will have access to the right microbial organisms that will help them to fix nitrogen. Sometimes, especially for using legumes for the first time on an area, those species for that legume might not be in the area yet. So we're introducing the inoculant in the area when you inoculate the seeds. And this is really important to be able to get this benefit of the nitrogen fixation. So when we're looking at introducing legumes, we're trying to get that benefit that they're going to be capturing the nitrogen that's in the air and putting into the soil. When they do this, that nitrogen is going to be available for grasses if they are planted together in companion, or it can even be just available later for the next crop that's going to be growing there. So definitely something that's worth to consider when you're choosing if you're going to have a mixture. And then we can also have some other benefits. One of the major things is definitely like that nutrient use efficiency that you're going to have and how how the space will be used, and you end up having most of the time you end up having better production, and also like you said, extending the grazing season. So that's definitely something that's worth for us working with livestock. And also when we add the nitrogen into the system, we're working on improving the quality of that forages, and the plant residues, or even the nutrients that are returning from the animals that are grazing that, they're going to come back to the soil, and we'll work on improving the fertility that you have on that area. So definitely something that's worth for us to consider as well. So one of the major questions that I get usually, it's, okay, so I learn a little bit about each species, but how do I select what I'm going to plant, right? My general answer to that is definitely go and talk with your extension personnel. We can help you. I work in extension here in South Carolina. You all have access to this group that can help you, or me, or some other people that you might have access as well. But there are some questions that we all need to know, so you can tell us a little more about your system, so we can understand what needs you have. We need to understand both like the animal species or categories that you're going to have on your system, but also we need to understand what is the investment that you're able to make, and then what is the level of management knowledge that you already have, or if you're still able to learn and to just really see more what information you need to have for using that system on that time of the year or property. But also we need to understand what equipment you might own or have access to, what acreage you are going to be using. We need to understand what was the management that was done on that area in terms of weed control, or if you have a high weed pressure, and then soil type, location. There are several things that we need to understand to really help you with this choice of species. We need to also understand like the nutrient management that you're going to be planning on doing. So what type of fertilizer or rate you're going to be able to apply, and all of that information, plus the weather and soil type conditions, we will be using to try to see which plants or varieties might be better adapted to the areas where you're at. So what is grazing? Grazing, it is this situation on this pasture where animals have like a really full mouth of forages on each bite that they are taking. But grazing is also the situation on the right? So what is the difference? The animals on the right are really struggling to get forages on each bite. So if you're not really familiar with ruminants, so ruminants have a certain number of movements that they are going to be able to make with their mouths per day. And this involves really eating, collecting the forages, but also ruminating and other activities that they're going to need to do. So when animals are struggling to get forages because of a situation that's really overgrazed, that will impact their performance and even their health. And then we also need to understand the impacts of overgrazing systems will have on the length of those species be available for grazing. So definitely impact the whole operation when we're not managing properly the system. This is just going on the same direction. So we do need to understand how plants grow, because these are perennial plants. This is an alfalfa Bermuda system. The pictures are just to illustrate, but it would be the same thing for annuals. We need to allow the annuals to establish and then let them have enough residual leaf area behind to be able to regrow after each time that we rotate animals out. and then allow those plants to have proper time in weeks to grow back to the height that we're going to start grazing them again, because otherwise we would be overgrazing, and then we could definitely have an impact that would shorten the grazing season. And that even on your perennial stands, perennial areas, if you are overgrazing them, you probably start seeing some open spaces after 1 year or even after some months, just because that overgrazing those plants, some of those plants are not able to continue to grow after some time, and then they just die, and then you start having some open spaces like on the picture on the top. So what I'm talking about here is definitely that we need to have a balance between the frequency and the intensity that you're going to be grazing those areas, and that's going to be the height recommendation that I talked about. And we do need to understand that the plants need to have enough leaf area behind to be able to start growing back after the animals graze that area. And rotational grazing is definitely one of the best tools that we can do that, because we are removing the animals from one area and letting that area have some time to recover and grow before you turn animals back there again. And the rotational grazing is also a really good tool for us to work on the return of nutrients on those pastures, because when we are using rotational grazing, the animals will be able to harvest that forage more efficiently, but also they are going to be distributing the urine and the feces throughout the area as they are grazing. And if you're not familiar with this, like the level of the nutrients that are returned, it is about 80% of the nutrients that the animals are eating that they are going to be returning to the pasture. So this is definitely one of the ways that we can be fertilizing the pasture throughout the movement that the animals are just moving there and eating. So definitely it's important to work on that management aspect, and rotational management is definitely one of the best tools that we have. This is like a really busy slide, but it's kind of like just a slide to remind you that improving our management practices does not need to be super difficult, because a lot of people associate improving management practices with like something that's going to be really difficult, but it's basically doing soil tests, measuring your forage mass, adjusting the stocking rate. And I can, in another time, I can come back and talk, or later I can come back and talk a little more about just other topics. But before I wrap up the presentation, I have some slides about the research that I mentioned before that I'm conducting here in Blackville. And when I first got here 2.5 years ago, one of the things that a lot of producers were asking me was to trying to look in some mixtures that they could use. And at that time, fertilizer was really way more expensive than it is currently. And one of the things that they wanted to do is if I could have some mixtures that we would not need to rely as much on nitrogen inputs, because we would have legumes on the mixture. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm looking at the forage production and seeing what the cost of the dry matter production will be for different mixtures, and also working on understanding what the nutrient recycling from those mixtures that's coming back to the soil, how much of that is accumulated and would be available for those plants growing on that season. So kind of like how that nutrient recycling works as a fertilizer. So this study, the first year of this study was started last year. We usually plant in early May on the area that I'm at, because we usually have some rain within 2 weeks or so. But we actually did not have much rain last year until sort of like mid-June. So we definitely saw some drought stress on these plants after they germinated. But the most the points that I was making about the fertilization, we only used 50 pounds of nitrogen for the whole season on these mixtures. And I have 3 mixtures. So I have one that's just grasses. So I have millet with crabgrass. And then I have 2 other mixtures. One has millet, crabgrass, sun hemp, and soybean. So sun hemp and soybean are legumes. And then the third mixture, I have millet, sun hemp, soybean, and cowpea. So 3 legumes and 1 grass. And then I'm using these mixtures and taking some measurements. And those include forage yield, quality, and some other things as well to help understand net nutrient recycling. So like I mentioned, we need to be careful with the management that we're going to be doing for these forages. For us here, we have a fixed stocking rate, which means that I have a set number of animals that I have available for this study. So I'm using them throughout the whole time, throughout the whole months. But we really need to, I use a grazing stick to make sure that I'm using I'm keeping the proper stubble height behind. And the reason for that is that I'm trying to avoid damaging the growing point. So going back to the growing point that I mentioned before, here is a picture from the top. So I just cut off the bulk of the leaves on a millet plant. And what I have the arrows pointing here is that growing point. So it's the point where the leaves are coming from. So definitely we need to make sure that we're not removing those growing points on the early stage, because that's how the plants are going to be growing the leaves from there. Some plants, like the millet, is able to produce some chillers from the bottom of the plant. And that helps with the growth of the plant and recover, even if you end up removing some of those growing points. But not all the plants are able to recover that way. And sun hemp is also has some like branches that we usually, when it breaks the growing point on the top, these lateral branches start to come up. So that's what I'm holding a plant there and showing how they come up. Then one question that I get often when we're talking about summer annuals, a lot of people wonder how those plants look like post-grazing. So on the left, you have a pre-grazing situation. We already had the seed heads up for the millet. And then on the right, you have the post-grazing situation on the same pasture. So you see that the animals will trample some of those plants, especially when the plants are taller, and but they are going to be able to harvest that forage, and some of the plants end up just coming back up and being upright again. So this is normal situation on the post-grazing. And I'm looking at the diet composition. So this means that I'm just separating the samples that I collect on the field. And then I have the grass and the legume percentage, because I'm looking at the quality that I'm getting from that diet. And I only have the first cycle and the second cycle grazing cycle data here. But one thing that I wanted to emphasize here, if you look at the first cycle of grazing, so on the top we have the mixture that just have grasses, and then on the bottom, on the middle and the bottom, we have the ones that have legumes. So the legumes are cowpea, soybean, and sun hemp. And we can see that on the first grazing, we had the majority of the percentage was grasses, but then when I just changed it here, so on the second cycle of grazing, so the first cycle was July, second was August. look at how much more legumes we had on those mixtures that included the legumes. So it literally doubled the amount of the legume percentage that we had there. So if you think about the quality of the forages that we usually have around August, having 35–40% of legumes in the diet of those animals is definitely something that's going to boost the quality of that forage for those animals grazing during that time of the year. And this data for crude protein is just from the first grazing cycle in July. So that's the reason that we're looking at about 13–15% of crude protein only. I'm still processing samples from last year, so I would assume that's gonna be higher crude protein because of the increase of legumes that we had. But something that I wanted to emphasize here is that so the first treatment, the pre-millet with crabgrass, which is on the first line, is the one that has just grasses, and then the other ones has legumes. But all these 3 treatments, they only had 50 units of nitrogen applied 30 days after planting. Then I did not apply any more nitrogen to any of these mixtures, these pastures. And notice that we did have higher yield on the 2 treatments that had those legumes, at least over 1,000 pounds of yield on those compared to the one that just had per-millet and crabgrass. So definitely we see that the legumes are fixing nitrogen and inputting on that system and supplying the grass as well. And we can see an increase in production there. There are some challenges on the grazing management that we need to definitely be careful with, and that's going to involve the management aspect. So I just want to show this picture again, how the pasture looks like. And because of how quick these species grow, we definitely need to make sure that we're keeping track of when we should be moving animals in and out, just to try to not have all the plants being too tall or having the seed heads produced too fast as well. And generally, grazing termination will be by September, sometime in September. Some years is going to be early September, some years you can extend until mid-September. But the plants will literally show you, because this is per-millet, so it starts to really die off, and you're going to see something that looks like this. And the last thing that I'll show is that this graphic on the bottom shows you root mass produced from those mixtures. So we still see differences on the amount of roots as well that we get when we're using legumes. We're getting higher root biomass production compared to when we only have per-millet with crabgrass. And this is how I collect the data. I collect 4 root samples in the field, and then I'm looking at the decomposition of that root material during the season through this burying these bags on the pictures, and that's gonna tell me the nutrient recycling happening below ground, which is a really important part, not only for nutrients, for nitrogen, potassium, and other things that will be released, but also for carbon release and accumulation on those soils. So just to really wrap up now, grazing summer annuals can be a good option because they produce high forage mass with really high quality. And also they can support the nutrient recycling that I was just talking about. And I will be looking at economics of this mixture, so the cost of producing the dry matter. And this is definitely some information that will be available by next year. So with that, I think that this can be a good way to see which options would make more sense for your operation based on the cost that you're seeing for that biomass production. I just want to mention I have a channel that's called Forage Drops on YouTube and other media, and I produce some videos about forage and livestock topics. So if you ever have any questions about general topics, I do have a lot of videos there that are more like timely management aspects throughout the year. I produce weekly videos, and you can check what's available there. And also I have my information, my contact information on the side here. And with that, I want to thank you again for the opportunity, and I'll take any questions that anybody has.
Yes, I have a question. Fortunately or unfortunately, I do not have any bare ground. So planting these annuals established would not be recommended, right?
I know some people do that, but my major concern is always how that can damage your perennial system. Because if you think about all the species that we talked about, most of them will be tall species. So the way that they are going to be growing, you would be planting them on the time that the Bahia or the Bermuda grass would be germinating and really accumulating that growth. And then if you have something that has quicker growth, like the annual species have, and would be growing over and doing like covering that Bermuda grass or Bahia grass that would be trying to germinate, you can end up having too much shade for your perennial grass. This might not happen in the first year, but like could happen over time that you would be shading too much your perennial grass that would be causing the plants to start to die and really thinning out that stand. So I would not recommend you to go and plant on a stand that's really strong and well established with perennial grasses, planting per millet or other species within that. Now, if you have some areas where you have some open spaces that are not really or a pasture or a side of the pasture that is not doing well, some people have been planting crabgrass on those spaces, or I've seen some people trying to do the annuals as well. So you definitely need to see what's the situation that you have, like what the condition of your pastures. But I would be reluctant to interseed the warm season annuals into your perennial Bahia grass or Bermuda grass, just because I would be concerned what the impact on them, on the Bahia grass and Bermuda grass would be.
One of my biggest challenges is trying to reduce nitrogen costs, but I guess I have to just do the winter annual, plant my legumes in the wintertime to help with reduce my natural cost.
That would definitely help you, because for you using crimson clover or red clover, crimson clover starts to really like accumulate a lot of mass in late February, March, and red clover is a little later compared to crimson clover. So the red clover will start to accumulate more mass in April and May. And if you're able to have a mixture, for example, of them overseeded on your pasture, which pasture do you have, Bahia or Bermuda?
Bermuda.
So if you're able to have that growing on your Bermuda grass pasture, you could let them really grow a little more, because they're going to be putting the nitrogen there. I have a pasture here that I'm doing a overseeding Bermuda grass here for grazing, and I do that, and we were able to rely on the nitrogen, like a good part of the nitrogen coming from the clovers over this past year. Not saying that we didn't use any nitrogen on that pasture, because that's gonna decrease if you're only rely on the clovers. That's not gonna be the same yield that you would have if you're putting more nitrogen there. It really depends on how many heads of cattle you're running and what is the yield that you're relying on getting on those pastures. But using clovers, especially in Bermuda grass, that's definitely a good option to put that residual nitrogen that's going to be available for the Bermuda grass when Bermuda starts to grow back.
Dr. Silva, in the case where you don't have the best soil fertility or the best management, any of those recommended annuals that are the best for somebody that doesn't have the best soils or management skills? Now, you something here about Bahia can handle tough off conditions. What about with annuals?
So with annuals, legumes will have higher requirements for fertility and soil pH.
Okay.
So if and really depends on how low of pH you would have. If you have something that's like 5 or less than 5.5, probably legumes will not do well there. Legumes prefer 5.8, 6 soil pH. Crabgrass grows fairly well in different conditions, but it is a little more expensive to plant by itself because the cost of the seed is a little higher depending on the variety that you're going to be using. Perennial will grow and produce some, but not yield as well as you would. So I would definitely see if I could use at least like some nitrogen and definitely look at the phosphorus and potassium levels that you have on the soil by doing a soil test, because when we plant something new, those plants will definitely need some starter as for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And definitely will be relying on at least a little bit, like 30 pounds, 40 pounds of NP and K will already help a lot for those species to establish. But if you are unable to use fertilizer or able to use just a little bit, probably using the grasses and crabgrass and millet would probably be the best options that you would have within the warm season annuals.
For me, it sounds like the Bahia field that I had planned to plant it on is probably not a good option. But how about a fescue field? Overseed a fescue field?
So I've seen people do that. It could work better just because when the fescue is going dormant, that's the time that you're going to have that millet and sorghum and everything else that will be shading the fescue growing more. I have not planted myself yet on fescue pastures, so I would need to see it, but I know of people using, and they usually interseed the millet and sorghum on their pastures. And they say that it does well, but I would need to do some plots before to tell you for sure. But if you want to try, I would recommend you to do a small part of your pasture, and probably the areas, if you have any areas that are more open or you're having some issues with the stand on that section, I would definitely go on that, because even though you do not have the fescue growing during the same periods that you would have the warm season annuals, you're still going to have some leftover when the fescue starts to regrow back later in the season. So management, you definitely need to do a heavier grazing towards like August, late August, September, when the fescue start to wake up. So you do not have all that left over, even the dead material over the fescue that would be a barrier to sunlight, because that could impact the regrowth, the fescue that's trying to wake up.
I have a quick question. Are any of the grasses that you mentioned native warm season grasses to the northern Georgia area? And if they're not considered native warm seasonal grasses, are there any that you might recommend?
Sure. None of these are native warm season grasses. So native warm season grasses are blueskin, Indian grass, eastern Burma grass.
I've just been speaking with some people from wildlife, and we were talking about doing a combination of some warm seasonal grasses that that would work both for my cattle, which are Black Angus, and for wildlife. So we're just kind of experimenting with some of it.
They're going to be growing from March through June, July, and that's the time that you're going to be able to graze them. They're not going to be growing further than July. It's just how they function. Like they go into sort of like a dormance around when the temperature gets too hot. So usually what most people do, they're gonna have an area where they have that established, and then they have the Bermuda grass or Bahia grass pastures some other places or other pasture. And they rely on having the native worm season grasses coming earlier than the other things, and starting the animals grazing there, and then they move to some other place. And also the native worm season grasses, they need way less nitrogen than the other ones that we usually plant. But you can use mixtures of big and little bluishing with Indian grass. Since you're looking at using for livestock, that would be my recommendation to you. And you can send me an email and I'll send you the seeding rates for that. And the reason that I'm saying this is because those 3 species, they are going to give you this longer season of growth. A lot of people, you have other options, like you have Eastern gummer grass, you have other things that you could use that are also native worm season grasses. But if you're going to look at something that you're trying to have, like get the most growth that you can from them, using the big and little bluishing combination of Indian grass is the best option that you have. Just for example, Eastern gummer grass, it's gonna have a shorter growth season and matures around like April or May at the latest. So when it matures, it's not gonna continue to grow and produce leaves. It's just gonna have the seed head, and then it doesn't grow really further than that. And also the bluishings and the Indian grass does better under grazing. Just for you to have a general idea, I don't know if you know a lot about native worm season grasses, but usually it takes at least 1 full season, if not 2 seasons, so 2 years to get them established, because you're not able to graze them for sure on the first year. Sometimes if you get a good establishment on the first year, you are able to graze them on the second year, but they take a little longer to establish really well. And you need to do like a good management on the grazing aspect just to make sure that you establish them. But they are perennials, so this is fairly common with the perennials to get a year establishment and then wait until the second year to graze.
What about Alamo switchgrass? Is it still a viable one?
Switchgrass is a viable one, but it's comparing to the blueshim and Indian grass. Does not do as well under grazing, especially when we started looking at switchgrass. At first, most people were looking for biomass because it produces a lot of forages, but under grazing, it's not the one that does the best. The little and the big blueshim and also the Indian grass would give you better yield and longer grazing than the Eastern gummer grass or the switchgrass could do. But I know people planting them as well. It's just that generally on the Southeast, even University of Tennessee has a lot of work and also a lot of producers that have been using the native worm season grasses both for grazing and for cutting for hay. That's their recommendation as well, to rely on the blueshings and Indian grass combination for grazing, because you can have a better return on the dry matter production for those systems and how long they're going to be growing in the season as well.
How far south can you grow those?
The native worm season?
The blue stem and Indian grass.
I got my degree from Florida. We grew them all actually in a lot of little and big blueshim in South Florida, on those areas where we have the swamps, that the cattle is usually underwater. There's not a lot of things that grow on the rangelands there. Native worms and grasses are the ones that really do well with those conditions. So a lot of people rely on them between forestry and under those conditions, they do really well on that area. So yes, we can definitely use them. I don't know if anybody is in South Georgia, but I would assume that somebody would have, and I can check as well. I can check with the people that I know around there if they know anybody growing and would have any input which ones do better around there.
Okay, thanks. So I want to thank Dr. Silva for giving us this excellent presentation. And if you have any other questions, she's posted her contact information on the screen.